Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Freud Museum. Welcome to the latest in our series of Freud's 4 p.m. sessions. Thank you for joining us today. Today's session is titled The Wisdom of Darkness, an exploration of trauma and dissent. This special event will feature a conversation between Richard Tyler and Professor Brett Kahr, and marks the publication of Richard's new book, As A Kite Falls, A Journey Through Dissent. Richard Tyler, a West End performer turned therapist, will share his personal experience following a life-changing diagnosis, offering insights into the theme of dissent, how we might learn from life's darkest moments. His training in cognitive hypnotherapy, psychosynthesis and emotional intelligence adds a rich dimension to his work. We are also honoured to welcome back today Professor Brett Kahr, a distinguished psychoanalyst and senior fellow at the Tavistock Institute of Medical Psychology. Professor Kahr has been a guiding mentor to Richard throughout his journey and is an accomplished author in his own right. Now, I hate this because I always get the number wrong, but with some 18 books, more or less, to his name, maybe more. He is also the Freud Museum's Honorary Research Director. Now, before we begin, I'd just like to mention that Richard's brilliant book is for sale downstairs, so if you haven't got your copy yet, please do pick one up, and there will be a book signing afterwards. And if you are not a member of the Freud Museum already and you would like to become one, please do consider signing up. You will get many extraordinary benefits, including free access to Freud's final home for yourself and a guest. And also you can attend our wonderful series of Freud's 4 p.m. sessions event, completely for free for yourself and a guest, as well as all kinds of other benefits. So, without further ado, I shall pass you over to our esteemed guests for today's conversation. Please welcome Richard Tyler and Professor Brett Kahr. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Giuseppe. It's an honor to be introduced by our director, Dr. Giuseppe Albano. I must say, I've had the privilege of working here at the museum in one role or another since its foundation in 1986, and he and the current team are really doing such exceptional work in preserving this institution, celebrating this institution, and advancing it, and we're very, very grateful to you. I recognize some of you as long-standing mental health colleagues, so I know you'll be only too familiar with the Freud Museum London, but I suspect some of you are here today for the very first time, so please do treat yourself to a proper search round the building after our conversation, because this is a most unique institution. And it gives us the opportunity not only to celebrate the genius of Herr Professor Sigmund Freud, who died in 1939, but also his wonderful daughter Anna Freud, who really invented what we would now refer to as child mental health. So this is a very, very important institution in that regard. And I don't think any of us would be managing our lives today without the genius of Sigmund Freud and his daughter. Because back in the 19th century, as some of you will know, if one had issues, if one had problems, if one were mentally unwell, then you would be known as a lunatic. You would be sent to an asylum, locked away, chained to a wall for the whole of your life. And Freud was literally the first physician to humanize the treatment of what we would now call mental illness or mental distress. And he said, listen, you're struggling, come into my room, lie down, take your shoes off, make yourself comfortable, and tell me what is on your mind. He really invented talking therapy, and I think none of us would be able to be here today without that capacity to put our feelings into words. And Richard and I are going to have a significant conversation about talking about this and the importance of talking. So a warm welcome to you all. Thank you for coming to what I know is going to be a very moving and very vital conversation to each one of us as human beings. I've had the privilege of knowing Richard Tyler for literally decades. I think we first met in 1987. I had the opportunity to meet both Richard and his lovely, lovely parents, and he was just a young boy at the time, but I found you very warm, very intelligent, very sensitive, and very impressive on multiple levels. And it did not surprise me that a few years later he then went and trained as an actor and soon became a West End superstar. Some of you may have seen him on stage in the West End. He took the lead young male role in both Les Miserables and in Phantom of the Opera. Really, really quite extraordinary achievements for actors. And then I was just delighted, but also surprised when Richard said, "Hey, guess what? I'm now going to retrain as a psychotherapist," and he did. So he comes from a very, very rich background indeed. And it's a real privilege for me to have introduced Richard to our wonderful psychoanalytical publisher, Kate Pierce, who's the publisher of Carnac Books, soon to celebrate its 75th anniversary in a few months' time, the world's oldest and most esteemed psychological publishing house. And I'm so honored that you wrote this book, a really brave, bold, straightforward book about the experiences you've been through. But let me now converse with you, if I may. Please tell us about life prior to your diagnosis, so that we can get a sense of, I mean, if I were asked to have summarized your life before you had to deal with what you've written about and what you shared with us very generously in your book, I would say you had the perfect life.
Thank you. Life was quite simple, I think. Life felt quite straightforward. And it feels like looking, I mean, I'm going to be, 15 I was when we met. And I'm going to be 52 next week. No, it's hard to believe. I look back to pre-cancer, life before cancer, because there was a life before cancer. And I imagined something that was quite in flow and was quite straightforward to navigate. For sure, tough times and difficulties and what felt like roadblocks to navigate. But I felt like I spent a lot of life in flow, and whatever I set out as being next, I managed to gravitate towards, and it gravitated towards me. So acknowledging that something was not quite right in my body, and I did know that something was not quite right in my body in the June of 2021. I knew that there was some stuff that was, I knew I was starting to lose weight, and I was starting to have some night sweats. And I was starting to get repeating infections. And it feels like from that point, life got quite clunky. And the flow that I felt like I'd moved with such grace through life, at least that was the illusion, a story I told myself. Suddenly I was moving through with less grace, and hospital appointment after hospital appointment. And still, even up to December the 7th, which was the day that I got the diagnosis of a stage 4 lymphoma, aggressive, a rare cancer. I just notice, even now talking about it, still feels fairly tricky to actually voice it. I voice it a lot in my head, but to voice it out loud feels quite difficult. So to get that diagnosis and to be told that if I didn't start treatment that day, I would have 3 to 4 to 5 months left to live. Life before was simple and straightforward, and my life took a massive turn that day. And you know, I knew something. As I said, I knew something wasn't right. I knew 24 hours before that something was significantly not quite right with my body. When a consultant rings you and says, "We have now got your biopsy results. and we need to see you at 9 o'clock in the morning, and have you got any steroids that you can take right now at home? Kind of like, okay, this is not going to be an easy 24 hours ahead. I think I switched off about 20 minutes into the consultation, and I was grateful that Kelly was sat next to me and somehow managed to soak up and absorb the next 2 hours that I spent there. But I think probably the tougher than that moment of being given the diagnosis was having to go home and tell a 16-year-old daughter that I had cancer, and I didn't know. We were just careering towards Christmas. I didn't know if that would be my last Christmas. And I didn't feel like I had a way to be present with what I had just been told, what I was starting to learn of what was ahead, which was 4 months of very aggressive chemotherapy, inpatient chemotherapy. And then after that bombshell was dropped, I was then told, oh, and then you have to have a stem cell transplant. You'll be in hospital for a month, no visitors, isolated room, triple cooked food, and then you'll need to isolate at home for 3 months, and your immunity will be smashed for the rest of your life. I mean, it kind of wasn't, it didn't really get any better. But then I had to go home and somehow put voice to a 16-year-old that I didn't know what was next. And I felt like I had endeavoured to be a dad to Mia that could help her be with whatever was next, almost in advance of it happening, sometimes probably too much, and wanting to save before things happened. And it was like, fuck, I've got no way of helping her move through this, because I don't know what to say, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know what happens next, and I don't know what it'll be like. Boy, and you said when we saw each other today, you're like, oh, we met, however many years ago, back in the old days when life was simple. And whether we just fooled ourselves, whether I fooled myself at 15, 16, 17, I set out what music college I wanted to go to, I got in, I left, I got an agent, I was incredibly fortunate to work for the 10 years that I sang. I sang in just in some of the biggest concert halls in the globe. I played some of the biggest roles in London. I was really lucky, incredibly lucky. And I didn't feel like I had a skill set to turn towards my descent, my fall. I followed what was the narrative, the cultural narrative, which is ascend, go up, go for more, go for bigger, go for better, go faster, move on to the next thing, gather as much as you can. That was the narrative I grew up with. And not at any point had I been educated or encouraged or modelled for me by my family system. How do you turn towards life when it's shit? How do you do that? And who teaches you that?
I love your choice of the title As A Kite Falls, because it's really about the early stages where you were the kite and you were flying. I'm sure there were lots of aspiring actors or even trained actors who were very jealous that you were doing such amazing work for so many years, and working with Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron McIntosh and all of those people. And then tell us about what happened when you went into the jolt phase, because your kite flew not only from this level of success in the theatre, but then you raised yourself to an even higher kite ascent.
I felt like theatre was, I fell in love with theatre, I fell in love with this idea of storytelling. I remember being 9 and standing on stage and telling stories to an audience and going, what a magical thing to be able to stand in a space and tell a story, and for people to be seduced by a storyline and a narrative, and to be taken to other places in their kind of their inner map and their outer map. It's like, wow, what a magical thing. And the business itself I hated. I loved rehearsing shows, I loved singing and performing and telling stories. I hated the business that I had to be a part of. And I felt like I had kind of in my own little world a bit of a meltdown where I just couldn't do that thing 8 times a week anymore. I would do 2.5 hours of a show, and I'd spend the rest of the day and night fretting about the show that I had to do the following night. And I wouldn't sleep, and if I did sleep, I'd then wake up the next morning going, shit, I've got to do the whole thing again. Some days twice. And I'm like, I don't know how I can do that. And I made a decision one day. It was contract renewal time at Phantom, and I said, I have to go. And I said to my agent, I have to go. And he said, yeah, fine. Go and have a break. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not having a break, I have to go. He said, yeah, go for a few months. I said, no, I'm going. He said, but what else do you know? What else can you do? I'm like, possibly not a great deal, but that didn't matter. What I knew was I had to get away from this thing I was doing. And it felt like the night I finished Phantom, it felt like immediately my kite could take flight again. I felt like my own story had weighed down the ability for my kite to fly. And my kite took flight again, and sliding doors scenario, complete sliding doors scenario, just being very attentive and curious about life and wondering what life had in store. And I met a lady who said, I'm a behavioural psychologist, I run a leadership development organisation, can't answer all your ifs and buts, but maybe there's an opportunity for you to come and use performance in the world of leadership. I honestly didn't really understand a word of what she was talking about, but it sounded pretty cool. So I thought, yeah, why not? So I met her, I went with her the next day and did some leadership stuff with this organisation, and I talked about performance, and I talked about masks, and I talked about identity, and we had a really cool day, and I typed my own contract, and I started work there the next day. And I had a really great 3 years there. I learned a lot. I learned an enormous amount, and then I decided I wanted to go and do more stuff combining and blending arts and creativity and leadership. So a couple of our wonderful team are here today, Sarah and Al, and we took a jazz band and we travelled across Asia, we travelled across all of the States, taking workshops around creativity and risk and innovation and potential and possibility into corporate organisations, and we did that for a lot of years. And yet again, in that time, I'm like, maybe I don't like doing the big group stuff anymore. Maybe I want to do more one-to-one work. I was already coaching, and then that was the decision to go to Psychosynthesis Trust. And so then this next journey started quite quickly. So for me, that's a bit about flow. I felt like, I left theatre, and in many ways, I know I have a lot of friends who've left theatre who have struggled to find their place, who are so identified with their role as an actor and their life as an actor that it's almost impossible for them to shake it off, and they don't want to shake it off. So therefore it's difficult to step into something else. I found it quite easy to step into something else. And I found it quite easy and empowering to step into doing more one-to-one work and more therapeutic work. And again, I felt like I was in flight. I was just starting to reshape the business a little bit and tweak some things and let go of some things. And I said I didn't want to do speaking gigs anymore. Of course, you asked me about Jolt, and I haven't talked about it because I talked about something else for the last 10 minutes. But it was a very good question, and I will come back to it.
It was Richard's first publication.
And the irony of writing a book called Jolt which was basically about, if you don't sit in your own driving seat of life and become present with the world around you and conscious and attuned to the environment in which you're in and what is happening around you, you will be jolted. We can decide who we think jolts us, whether it's the universe, whether it's a god, whether it's soul. We will in some way be nudged and jolted. So I wrote this book. It's like, I suppose with hindsight, slightly smart-ass going, come on folks, if you don't look around you, the world's going to nudge you quite hard. And off I went, wrote the book, and then went and did a load of other things. And I think it was a year before my diagnosis, we were on holiday in Spain, and I got kidney stones, and I spent 6 days in a hospital with kidney stones in Spain whilst Kelly and Mia attempted to have a holiday. And it was a good nudge for me, because I came out there and I'm like, God damn, I need to kind of reassess and adapt and reshape some things and let go of some stuff in my life and make room to bring some more things in. So I thought I had a very clever lens on it all, and how quickly we are pulled back to what is most familiar, what is most comfortable, what is most predictable. And, I was very quickly ascending again, and I'm fine. And of course I took the nudge from having kidney stones, but I'm fine. And I do think that if we stop listening to the nudges, and if we stop holding the silence, so that moment of silence now, contained within that moment is an enormous amount of information and insight and wisdom. Most of the time we either numb out to life because it's just too difficult to bear, and we numb out, alcohol, sex addiction, video games, however we choose to numb out, we numb out. Or we just think that we're greater than the problems, and we rise above and we bury what's difficult, and on we go. And that's what I did. And I got nudged. I got tapped on the shoulder gently first, and then I got smashed around the head with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis of an incurable cancer. And I, I've asked in the last couple of years, why incurable? Why not a lymphoma that I can be cured of and I skip on happily down the road? And I genuinely wonder that sometimes. Why? Why do I need to live with this thing that is incurable, that has a high propensity to return at some point? Why? And, of course I don't know the answer. I can only surmise that there is something in there about keeping me real and keeping me truthful and keeping me attuned and switched on. And I have to, I have to check my body on I saw my consultant yesterday, really on a daily basis, check for lumps and bumps and changes. And I can't escape it. I can't numb out to it. I can't bury it. I can't turn away from it. Every day I look in the mirror and I see long flowing locks, but I also see the multiple images of me the day Mia shaved my hair off before going to have my first chemo cycle. The day when I lost my hair when it just started to grow back and I had a stem cell transplant. I can't get away from that now. So it will act to help me keep myself truthful to myself.
I'm so grateful to you for speaking with such honesty, such clarity, and in such a touching way. Would you describe what you have been through as traumatization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with a capital T. Yeah, I would. I feel like it is. We do a lot of work. I'm very grateful to the NHS and for those of you who have experienced any life-altering illness or maybe a cancer diagnosis, generally what happens is it's like they send the hit squad in, they completely annihilate you, and then they go, we'll see you in 3 months. And I felt like that's what happened. I was completely annihilated. I still feel, a couple of years on, that my body is full of toxins. In fact, the consultant I saw yesterday listed a few of the drugs I had as my first chemo drugs, and said it's one of the most toxic chemotherapy protocols you could have. And those toxins will stay in your system for a long, long time. And so, whilst I'm grateful to the NHS, we also work really hard we as in the Royal, Kelly and I, and with an integrative oncologist, to look at other ways to keep the environment in which I live healthy and well and nourishing for me. And I have to manage infection because I generally have a stream of ongoing infections. But I feel like I cannot get away from the fact that my body is still riddled with toxicity. And psychologically that bears heavy. There are days where I think it doesn't, and I kid myself that it doesn't. But there are days, and I kind of go through bursts. I feel like I've gone through the last month of feeling really sad, upset, then lost. I guess it's grief. Whilst I am, boy, are we fortunate to live, the life that we live. We made a decision this year to move from London, and we moved out to Wiltshire. We have 5 acres. We've got alpacas. We've got chickens. We've got pigs. We've got a very cool dog. Me is half an hour down the road. Good for us. Possibly less good for me and university life, but such is life. And so I feel incredibly blessed. We set up a charity 2 weeks after I got diagnosed for blood cancer. We've raised over £200,000. I wake up each day, I look out, I see animals. We live in the middle of a field, in a house in the field. And it's incredible. I wake up and I go, God damn, we're lucky. And Kelly goes off to work, and I go, I actually feel really sad and upset and lost, and mourning the way in which life felt easy and straightforward. And then for a few weeks or days or months I feel a bit better, and then I'm reminded of it all again. I think having bloods done last week and seeing my oncologist yesterday and being back at, we have an incredible new Dyson Cancer Centre at the hospital at Bath, and going back there yesterday, I'm kind of reminded of what felt like my everyday for many, many months, which was going to the hospital every day. So yeah, I feel like in the cells of my body is stored this experience of the last 2 years and the things I had to give up and change and say no to and say yes to. And I've read bits of some of the interviews I've done in the last few weeks. I needed to read bits of the book, and I've read it and gone, God, did I write that? Actually, did I live that? I lived that. I almost forget what I have lived through.
But I wonder in a way, Richard, whether reading your memoir and then forgetting it, thinking, did I really go through this? Was that really me? Maybe quite an encouraging blessing to you and to all of us as human beings, that it is possible to be traumatized, to have horrific, explosive medical news appearing out of the blue, when you'd lived a very physically fit, healthy life, you know, singing and dancing on the stage eight times a week and all of that, and realizing that actually one still has access to the kites that can make an ascent rather than a descent.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you have really, you know, a lot of people who receive horrific diagnoses and go through very invasive treatment, which you describe now and describe in much more detail in the book, you know, will literally break down. You have not broken down. You're feeling the pain, but you are able to put it into words. And you and your family have been able to be immensely creative. You know, it would have been very easy not to create a charity to help with cancer, not to raise £200,000 out of the blue. And I'm just wondering whether vocalization, verbalization, and the art of creativity, I'm looking at you, but I'm also looking at our friend, Herr Professor Freud, who's right over there, and also on top of that piece of furniture. And in 1923, 101 years ago, as you know, he was diagnosed with incurable maxillofacial cancer, and back then, in 1923, there were no treatments available that were efficacious in any way. You know, to be ill, it's much better to be ill in the 21st century than in the 19th century or the 20th century. But Freud would have said that being able to talk, being able to have a community of intimacy, whether it's with an analyst, whether it's with family members, friends, colleagues, whatever it might be, and to engage in creativity. He wrote more books after his cancer diagnosis than he did in the whole of his career, and I think that helped him to live in a highly functional way until the age of 83. So I'm wondering about your capacity for verbalization and your capacity for creativity, which you'd already proven on multiple fronts.
Let's hold the creativity
Sure.
piece, because creativity has been fundamental. And talking, yes. Do you know what? This is the bit about, I feel, and we've used the word a lot since being diagnosed, about feeling privileged, which is an odd word to use when your life is turned inside out by an illness. But I genuinely feel very privileged. I feel incredibly resourced. I have a very good family around me. Kelly is relentless in pursuit of basically whatever is best for humanity, but I'm fortunate that it's especially whatever is best for me. So rarely does she sit still in her pursuit of what might be best for us, for me, for us as a collective and a family, but for us much wider than that. And you know, outpouring of friends who've travelled from other countries to be here today, and they are friends who have stood, they've almost sat in the front row of the stalls for every single performance I've given, and I mean performance of the days where I've done a broadcast from hospital, having just vomited, had diarrhea, feeling awful. They're still there in the front row going, irrelevant, my friend, we will be there. And there are a lot of them here today. I'm very blessed to work with a therapist that I work with, who I don't know how without her I would have navigated it. I guess I would have done, but differently. But you know what? For me, that has been every week has been my pocket of time where I get to just go bleh. And so so this bit about feeling privileged and blessed and fortunate to have gone through it in the way I went through it, which was part of the reason, a week after the diagnosis, when we needed to raise some money for a drug, the consultant said, I want you to have a particular drug, but it's going to cost you 40 grand. And okay, problem, don't have 40 grand sitting in the bank. Penny's like, let's crowdfund, let's do a GoFundMe campaign, let's see if we can get a few pennies towards it. Well, we got £45,000 within 6 days. And for me, that was an outpouring of people who flocked towards us. And lots of those messages were people going, you ran a workshop that I was on 18 years ago and you spent a minute with me at lunchtime talking through something that I was struggling with, and those people came back into my life. So this very tight circle of people, this kind of tight inner ring, and then this slightly broader set of people who, regardless of the quality of the performance, and regardless of whether it was a tragedy or a comedy, a moment of tragedy or a moment of comedy, were present in my life. So, whilst I can say, yes, I've been able to verbalise, I have got through it, I'm still sitting here having this conversation, I've written a book, we live on a farm, I get to do really wonderful stuff with animals and with people, and we're so privileged. And the reason we set the charity up was because I laid there on a Saturday night and I said to Kelly, we're living this in a way that feels actually quite easy and effortless. And there are people who will be travelling to chemotherapy on a tube with a pillow under their arm. They will be coming home, they will have to take on an extra job, they will not know where the money's going to come from for their rent or their mortgage that month. How the hell do they cope? And I think part of that, I wrote this book not to be published. I wrote this book because I wanted it to sit on my laptop, because I wanted to find a way of being able to make some sense of this experience that I was living through. It was never to find the form of a book. And I felt like I wanted to speak what was unspeakable, and I felt like I wanted to bring to bear the conversation that a lot of people are not able to have. And I would say that's especially men, because I don't think we are taught to turn towards our descent. I don't think we're taught to turn towards our kite crashing down to the ground. Our patriarchal systems render us mostly emotional cripples. And I look at my own father, and he did the best he could with the environment in which he was brought up in. He lost his father at 6, he was packed off to a boarding school. He did his best to find this blend that I talk about in the book, of this kind of, how do we find this blend of mature masculine qualities and mature feminine qualities, and how can we hold both, and how can we hold both the kite falling and the kite flying? And he wasn't able to do that. And there are a lot of people, and we're living in this time of polycrisis. We're still on the back of COVID. Our world has changed beyond all recognition, and we have a political crisis. We have educational crisis. Our health system, despite Lord Darcy, I'm sure, writing a wonderful 180-page report to tell us that our health system is broken, I'm not sure we needed that to know, but we look around at our systems, and there are people within the systems who are struggling. And so whilst I think I'm living in quite a privileged way with this community around me, and yes, I think I'm active in it. So I think I've been active in my illness. I think I have agency. I don't think I've sat there and gone, poor me, there's nothing I can do. And you know what, we made a decision when I was diagnosed. What happens with a lot of people who get that type of diagnosis, or that type of news that is going to change their life beyond recognition, is that they bolt the door, they shut all the windows, they shut the curtains, and they hope that they might be able to sneak out the back door and that no one will notice. I was acutely aware that cancer was hammering at my door and was going to come in. And it was coming in. So we made a decision that we open the door and that we invite cancer in, and we give it a seat at the table, and we build a relationship with it. And some people have gone, it sounds like utter bullshit. And I'm like, do you know what? That's absolutely fine that people would think that, because there is a big mentality of, kind of the cancer mentality is enormous. And people have got to navigate cancer in whatever way they feel best able to, and what helps them just be able to stand upright during it. But for me, that didn't feel like the type of energy that was going to do it for me. It didn't feel like that I had enough. I felt like I had enough inner battle going on and enough inner work to do without this other energy being spent on kind of two fingers to cancer. So we made space for cancer, we made room for it, we gave it a seat at the table, and I've attempted, and I continue to attempt to, I suppose, build a relationship with it and understand the wisdom. Like, why me? Why me? Why knock on my door? Why with this cancer? Why me at this point in my life? I think I do good things. I think I've spent 50 years trying to live in service of other people. So I've sat down for many, many hours in the last 2 years and gone, what's the purpose of this? What am I meant to learn from this? What am I meant to now take and bring into my life and in the best way that I can endeavour to live? And perhaps through doing that will help other people think about how they can best turn towards dissent and understand that dissent offers us insight and offers us wisdom. But the cultural view is still quite binary, that we push away dissent and we encourage growth and more and bigger and better, and that this isn't to be tampered with. And I actually think we have to fiddle with this stuff.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And what you say is very insightful about dissent. For many years I had the privilege of teaching nearby at the Royal Free Hospital, teaching psychology to medical students, because back in those days they were never trained in how to talk to patients. They were very good at treating patients, but not in communicating. And I remember one of the senior colleagues on the ward, who was a very esteemed hematologist, I was so shocked one day when he said to me, he said, people are living nowadays longer and longer, but anyone planning his or her 135th birthday should cancel it, because new data has shown that because of the analysis of DNA, it is impossible for a human being to live beyond the age of 134 years. maybe that will change with Amazon in years to come, who knows? But, we all must face mortality. And I think what was so traumatizing for you was that this came on at such an early stage in your life compared to somebody in their early hundreds who would be prepared for the mortality. And I know many centenarians who can't wait to die. They say, I'm just exhausted, I've led a good life, but enough is enough, and I don't want to make it to 134 or 135. So I think you had that to deal with. But from a scientific point of view, Richard, I think what I've learned from your talk today, and what I've learned from having had the privilege of reading your book in the draft form and then in the published form, I think I've now read it 4 times, and you don't need me to say this, because one can always tell that a good writer is also a brilliant speaker. So Richard speaks as he writes, and he writes as he speaks. It's an absolutely gripping book, and I can't think of a more engaging and heartwarming and encouraging and tear-inducing book. It had so many emotions raised from reading it. But what you've done, I think, quite naturally, is that you've provided us a reminder of what scientists have taken decades to discover, namely that we're all going to go through deadly illnesses. I don't know any human being who has not one day come to die. And the more mentally healthy one is in the lead up to death, the more one will be able to prepare for it and still enjoy life. So going through therapy or coming from a strong family is a very good way of surviving and not breaking down and being psychiatrically hospitalized. So that you really show us, I think, tremendously in the book. You show us what amazing American psychology researchers like James Pennebaker in Texas have demonstrated, that the more you put your feelings into words, an idea that he happened to get from Herr Professor Freud, the more you're likely to be less symptomatic psychologically and live longer. All of that. And the more creative you can be, and the more voluntary work that you can do, because it'd be very easy with the cancer diagnosis not to set up a big charity, but the more you can offer put your feelings into words. You're doing all the right things psychologically and scientifically, if I may say so. Very, very impressive.
Well done me.